Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Let's go ahead and start our meeting.
Hola a todos, gracias por estar aquí. Así que vamos adelante, vamos a empezar esta reunión.
All right, can we please share screen, Bobby?
Por favor, ¿podrías compartir la pantalla, Bobby?
All right. Thank you, everyone, and good evening. And thank you so much for being here for our orientation of our plan, implement, and close race and equity focused community engagement model introductory meeting.
Buenas tardes a todos, gracias por estar aquí y le damos la bienvenida a esta orientación en relación al plan, implementación y la reunión acerca de la raza, la igualdad enfocada en el compromiso en la comunidad y modelo PIC. Es la reunión de introducción.
I just want to make a note that this meeting is being recorded, so your video or face and name may appear on the recording once it's posted.
Esta reunión va a ser grabada, así que por favor invitamos a que diga su nombre, encienda su video y proceda.
All right, and another reminder is to please make sure when we're speaking, we're doing so clearly at a moderate pace or slowly if possible, so that our interpreters can translate.
También hacemos la invitación que cuando quiera hacer sus comentarios, por favor lo haga de una forma pausada, clara, para permitir a nuestros intérpretes poder tener una actualización en su interpretación.
And my name is Diane Sanchez, and I use pronouns she, her, hers, and I will be one of your co-facilitators today along with my partner.
Y mi nombre es Diane Sánchez y yo voy a usar los pronombres de ella, ellas y ellos. Y también le damos la bienvenida a todos ustedes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lashe Cobley, and I will be the other facilitator this evening. Excited to be here.
Hola a todos, mi nombre es Lashe Cobley y estoy siendo la coordinadora de esta facilidad a todos aquí.
All right, so let's go on to the next slide.
Así que vamos a la próxima gráfica.
Okay, so for instructions for Spanish interpretation, I'll go ahead and pass it to our interpreter, Jeanette.
Ahora, para hacer el siguiente paso en cuanto a los controles de la interpretación, por favor, seleccione su lenguaje en español y si tiene la opción en esta reunión, puede escoger inglés o español y para escuchar la interpretación, puede también apagar su audio. En los controles de esta reunión tenemos también ubicada en la parte de abajo en la pantalla, haga clic en el idioma que le gustaría escuchar y las opciones son inglés, español. Puede también silenciar su audio.
All right, does anyone have any questions on accessing the Spanish audio? If you do, can you please raise your hand?
Y si alguien tiene alguna pregunta para accesar a la interpretación desde su audio, por favor puede levantar su mano virtual.
Thank you, everyone. Next slide, and I will pass it to Bobby.
Gracias a todos, así que en la próxima gráfica le voy a dar el tiempo a Bobby.
Good evening. Please mute and rename yourself to have your first name, last name, and your affiliation. To rename, click on the top right side of your picture video. For example, Jane Doe /CARB for California Air Resources Board. If you need help, use the chat function to request assistance. To mute or unmute, please remain on mute when you are not speaking. Zoom, if you are using Zoom, the mute and unmute button at the bottom left And if you're using your phone for this call, dial *6 to mute or unmute. For your camera, click the camera icon at the bottom left of your screen to toggle your video on and off. To be added to the speaking queue, please use Raise Hand. If you're utilizing Zoom, click Participants, then Raise Hand. If you're using your phone, dial *9. We'll check in with the phone line periodically. Click on the chat icon near the center bottom of your screen. Choose Private Chat to chat with the host or the co-host. And please keep in mind, all private chats are archived. When a poll is launched, it will pop up on your screen. Select your answers and click Submit when done. You can open and minimize the poll by clicking the poll icon found at the bottom of your screen or in the More menu. And I'll hand it over to Diane.
Thank you, Bobby. So we'd like to start our meeting with presenting a set of meeting guidelines or agreements that CARB staff will follow, as well as all participants here today. So before I present the meeting guidelines that we have on the screen, I'd like to open it up and see if any of the participants have any meeting agreements or guidelines that they would like to add to this list or perhaps prioritize. All right, not seeing any hands. So as you can see, we have some meeting guidelines here. In general, we would like to ask that all participants and CARB staff today are present. We want this space to be respectful and we want it to stay kind so that everyone feels comfortable sharing in this space. Additionally, we want to welcome people to take space and make space. What that means is if you're usually quiet, try to challenge yourself to take some space. And if you usually talk a lot, let's try to be mindful and leave some room for the quieter voices. We want to try and actively listen to one another by listening to understand. We want to keep in mind that all ideas and points have value. We want to make sure to honor our time overall. And then finally, we want to develop solutions with equity in mind. So remember that equity is this idea that not everyone starts off from the same place and that some folks have unique advantages or barriers. So we want to recognize those barriers that exist in certain communities and in order to tailor solutions that will meet those challenges, we want to keep those barriers in mind. So with that, let's start with some questions so we can learn who else is in attendance here today. So next slide, please. All right. So the first question to learn about who's in our audience today is what region of California is your community located in? If we could launch the poll, please. Awesome. So let's see where everyone's coming in from. And if you're not sure what you're considered, you can take a look at the map and see where we've mapped north, central, southern, or coastal. Okay, looks like some answers are still trickling in. Okay, why don't we end the poll and then we can see where everyone's coming from. All right, can we share results, please? Okay, awesome. So it looks like we have a majority of folks coming in from Northern and Southern California. We do have a couple of folks coming from Central and Coastal, as well as statewide. So it looks like it's a pretty good mix. So thank you everyone for being here. We really appreciate that. All right, let's go to the next slide for another question to learn about who's here. And for this, I'll pass it along to my co-facilitator, Lashe.
Thanks, Diane. So here again, we're still trying to get a sense of who all is in the room and joining the conversation. And so we'd like to know which entity best represents you all. Can you launch the poll? So it can be as an individual, you're representing yourself, a community-based organization, or maybe a faith-based organization, local or regional government, non-government or nonprofit organizations or NGOs, state government, school district, or education agency, air district, tribal government, and other. And I just want to put a reminder out here that if you don't want to fill out the poll, you can feel free to put your answers in the chat. And also for all the polling that happens today, or just in general, feel free to email us. And I know the email address will get put in the chat. Can we see some of the results? Looks like we have a mix here as well. I'm seeing some community-based organizations, some individuals, state and local governments, air districts, and other. Yeah, the chat will be a great place to tell us who the others are. It's a weird way to say that, but for those who selected others there. Okay, next slide. So for this question, mostly I would say for our state and local government folks, not so much wanting the answer from you guys on this one, really wanting to hear from community members for this question, and which is in general, what time works best for future meetings. You'll see that we'll have a lot of meetings coming up, and so wanting to know what time would be most appropriate, morning, afternoon, or evening. Can we launch the poll? Okay, that seems like a good amount of time. We can end the poll. Oh, wow. Okay, we have a really good distribution, about 33% in the morning, 52% in the afternoon, 48% in the evening. Good to know. We'll see what we do with that information. Thanks. So let's get into this. So now we have a better sense of who all is in the room. Thank you for that. And we have a better sense of who is being represented. Next slide. So the overall goal for today is to really highlight and launch the draft community engagement model. CARB's goal in interacting with communities is to not have a business as usual approach. Instead, we would like to co-develop how these conversations and interactions can occur in the future. And so we'll talk more about how we all can get involved and how this can be co-developed. We'll start off with some background for what the PIC model is, and really want to emphasize that it is very draft. We're at the very beginning of this conversation. And so we'll give you an overview of what we have. Then we'll also spend some time talking about how to collaborate with us, how to co-develop this model, and our solicitation calling for community experts. And then we'll end by talking about future community meetings. And with that, I'll hand it over to our Deputy Executive Officer, Chanel Fletcher.
Thank you so much, Lashe. I just want to say one thing. First, I'm sick, so apologies if I cough through this a little bit, but that's just what it is in the winter for me. The second thing I want to say is that before I get into kind of my more formal speaking notes, I just want to say a huge thank you to this team of CARB staff that are in front of you. Each of them have worked together as a team to develop the materials, to really think through this kickoff, and have just done so much work behind the scenes. And so I know it may feel like you may not know who all members of that team are. I generally think it's those that have the blue backgrounds, it tends to be, but I just wanted to give a huge amount of acknowledgement because I think part of when we're talking about that shift, a lot of it to me really is building in that team dynamic and not having it, I think, kind of operate in this hierarchical space. And so I've been really impressed with this team and how I think they've worked together, and it's been a very flat collaborative experience. So thank you all so much. And a huge thank you to everyone that's joining tonight. I'm so grateful. I know that there's other places you could be, so appreciate that you are here with us. If you do not know who I am, as you heard, I am Chanel Fletcher. I am the Deputy Executive Officer of Environmental Justice at the California Air Resources Board. I oversee our external efforts to advance racial equity and address environmental justice. I directly oversee our Office of Community Air Protection, which is charged with implementing AB 617. For those that don't know, that's a law that brings together communities, air districts, and the Air Resources Board to develop community-driven plans to address localized air pollution. I also oversee our Office of Environmental Justice, Tribal Affairs, and Border Relations. That office works across the agency to integrate environmental justice principles, while also managing programs such as our AB 32 Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, our Tribal Affairs Program, AB 617 Community Air Grants, and Border Program. But tonight, I'd like to just invite you to join us as we at CARB deepen our commitment to racial equity and environmental justice. Many of you have worked with our agency in the past, and I want to acknowledge that experience. So whether it was positive or challenging, I just want to acknowledge that many of you have already kind of experienced in some way working with us in some form of community outreach or engagement. I do want to note that we've spent a lot of time learning that we cannot simply just speak to racial equity and environmental justice in our board meetings or in these kind of like high-level talking points, but we really do need to embed racial equity and environmental justice in all of our work. The development of explicit and transparent processes and tools are one way to embed racial equity and environmental justice, while also providing accountability to ensure that our words match our actions. And I want to pause there because I think the important point is that we can't just be about it, right? Or we can't just say it, whatever that phrase is, right? There's something about you can't just say it, you have to be about it. However you say that, and I'm not saying correctly now, it's that we can't talk a good game about environmental justice and racial equity and then continue status quo. And that's what I think part of what we really are here today is to start changing that and to really be about what we're talking about. Racial equity and environmental justice is also organizational change work. And so it means that it's not just about the development of the tools and the processes, but how we're shifting our own organization to reflect the principles of environmental justice. And I do want to acknowledge the work that we now have a Deputy of Internal Operations, Edna Murphy, who is also looking at and really going to be advancing that kind of organizational shift and culture as we think about not just our external efforts, right, that you're seeing tonight, but we're also thinking about the internal changes that we need to make at CARB to reflect racial equity and environmental justice. I cannot state this enough. Racial equity and environmental justice cannot just be a talking point for us. It really does need to be at the forefront of all we do. And as you see on this slide right here, when we're discussing environmental justice, it's really a procedural and an outcome-focused approach. So we know that in addition to that kind of like stated commitment that I think people have heard in our board meetings and from our executive officer, we really do need those tools and models to guide us and move us towards implementation. This slide provides a visual on what our process looks like. So our efforts to build a model for equitable community engagement then results in earlier and more meaningful engagement, which then provides the information that we need to make policy and regulatory decisions. And as we're thinking about those decisions, we also apply a racial equity lens, which will then ideally lead us to more equitable decisions and outcomes. Next slide. I'm going to take a step back here because I realize that not everybody may be as immersed in like CARB culture knowledge. So in 2020, our board adopted the 2033 board resolution, which clearly states our commitment to advancing racial equity and social justice as an agency. As a part of the implementation of this resolution, we've started to develop a racial equity tool to analyze and assess racial equity as we're developing our programs, our policies, regulations, and actions. We've also started to identify and implement best practices for community engagement. So we really are following through in terms of working with communities without prejudice, bias, or contempt. So tonight, we hope this workshop really emphasizes. Oh, good, it went away. Sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze. See, I told you I was sick. That we as an agency are reevaluating our existing engagement efforts and moving towards a more equitable and meaningful engagement model. I do hope that as you, or when you walk away from this kind of workshop, that you see that our commitment to you, that we really do want to improve how we engage and build relationships with communities. Next slide. And let me elaborate a little bit more on that board resolution. So I already mentioned some of the commitments, and I believe there's a link in the chat already where you can read through that resolution. I did want to focus on two ways that we really are implementing the resolution to really become more equitable, advancing racial equity, and addressing environmental justice. So one you'll see is our racial equity assessment lens. This is the racial equity lens. And this is a data-driven analytical tool for staff to embed racial equity in the planning and the implementation of policies, programs, regulations, and actions. It's both a tool and a process, which really does provide a consistent method for staff to consider any kind of program, regulations, or policy, right? Their proposed impacts and outcomes. And it really is about looking at it through the lens of racial equity. Another effort, and that's actually really the focus of tonight, really is talking about, I think, our community engagement and how we want to partner with community experts. And that's kind of our PIC model, the plan, implement, close, which we'll share more in a minute. Next slide. Okay, this is kind of where I'm going to wrap up if you're sick of hearing my voice, by the way. I did want to spend a little bit of time on the racial equity lens. And what I want to kind of emphasize here is that, as I mentioned before, it's a tool for us to start embedding racial equity analysis and assessment in our processes, our protocols, our policies, and regulations. And what we really want to do here is give a mechanism for staff to explicitly analyze and address racial equity as we're developing these policies. And these can be internal policies, these can be external policies, these could be our regulations. And we're also thinking about it in the lens of implementation and accountability. And part of why we're talking about it tonight is, one, that it's a great opportunity for us to build in that accountability. And I think for us to leverage the expertise, because many who are here may be experts, I think, in the engagement and the outreach, but also may have spent years, right, doing the racial equity work. And so we really do want to leverage that experience and that knowledge as we're developing this tool. We also want to make sure that we're accountable and people understand when we say we have a racial equity lens, what that is. We want to make sure that people can see it and they know what that is. As you'll see here, and I think on the screen, really when we're talking about this, it's kind of it's an approach that we're taking, but like I said, it's also a tool to really think through how staff can actively change the processes and the protocols and policies that are currently in place. And as I shared before, we know that if we really want to advance racial equity, if we want to advance and address environmental justice, we can't do it if we're kind of in a status quo of really focusing on what we already, continue to do. And I'll take a moment really quickly to kind of walk through what you see on the slide. It's really a series of questions, right? So I think when we're talking about the proposal stage, it's really thinking about what are the decisions and the action, right, that we're developing to present to the board. And I think for many that are part of this generally we're thinking about, right, what's coming in front of our board, and we're thinking about how we're proposing that. We want to make sure that we're thinking about how racial equity, the goals, the concerns, or considerations are already built into that proposal. When we're looking at the data part of this, right, we want to think about what is the data that's there, what's missing, and where is the qualitative data that we may not be actively looking for, right? And I think that's a tendency that we focus on the quantitative piece, but qualitative is significant. And so we really are thinking about how do we catch that as we're drafting this. Community engagement, right? Huge part of this, right? And it's actually all throughout the process. And like I said, we'll talk about that more in a minute. Talk about analysis, right? Who's going to benefit and who's going to be burdened? And that's something that I think is a really big part of what we're talking about when we're looking at this through the lens of racial equity. We talk about accountability and implementation. We really are thinking about, well, what's the plan, right? Like when we're talking about it, it's not just about getting it to the board and getting it adopted, but what are we thinking about after? And how do we make sure that those intended outcomes that we want to see actually do line up with the racial equity goals that we talked about in the proposal stage? And then when we get into the accountability, how is that going to happen? And I think those are places where we definitely have heard a lot of comments from stakeholders. And so we want to kind of think through those pieces as we're developing, again, right, those policies, those programs, and the regulations. And I think one of the things that is really important for us to understand is that it's critical to be partnering with community residents, with stakeholders, because I think the information just can't be one-sided, right? It can't be us coming out and reaching out, getting, giving you a draft, getting your input, and then taking it back in and us trying to incorporate it. It really does need to be a two-way flow of information, and it needs to be interactive. And so part of what I think the racial equity lens does is that it works in collaboration with our community engagement efforts to ensure as we're reaching out, we're having that two-way communication. We're thinking about this much more through a relationship lens than a transaction lens. We're also taking transparent actions that you as communities, as stakeholders, understand and know to embed it throughout the process. And I think that has to be together, right? It can't be one or the other. It has to work in tandem. So with that, I will stop speaking and subjecting you to my sick self. And I believe I am turning it back over to, it's either Lashe or Diane. Is it Diane?
Thank you, Chanel. We'll turn it over to Jonathan so he can start telling us a little bit more about the PIC model. And thank you very much for that overview. That was excellent. Could not tell you're sick, by the way.
Yeah, me neither. Thank you so much, Chanel. And thank you everyone for being here today. It's really great seeing how many people that we have interested in what we'll be discussing. My name's Jonathan Blufer. I'm an air pollution specialist at CARB. And I want to shift our focus to what Chanel was talking about, and that's our draft community engagement model, or plan, implement, and close race and equity focused community engagement model. Next slide. So for our PIC model goals, we've been hearing from communities for a very long time that, our staff really do need more guidance and training to equip them with the tools, knowledge, and confidence to effectively engage with communities. Internally at CARB, we've been hearing a lot of the same things. We have a lot of staff that really want to do better, and they really need these tools as well. So we know that this is very important, and we do want to work with all of you to really create the best version of a community engagement model that we can for our staff. And again, this really goes back to partnering with our community stakeholders. That really is essential to co-creating this PIC model. We do want to change how CARB really thinks about how we do community engagement. And so, this really is just the beginning of that process. What I'm going to be going over in the next few slides, as we've discussed, is a very, very early draft of the PIC model. We definitely expect, as we co-create this with our community partners, that a lot of it might change, and that's okay. Next slide, please. So now to go over the four main parts of what are now in the current draft of the PIC model, and the first being the narrative, which really equips staff with the knowledge as to why community engagement is so essential to CARB's work. It acknowledges the actions that have disproportionately impacted communities for many generations, particularly communities of color, and still, impacting those same communities today. And so provides a lot of the historical context as to why staff should be using the PIC model, why they should be really thinking about community engagement in whatever CARB action, so policy, program, regulation, or project that they are working on. And this will really help provide them with the tools for how to be successful in their community engagement efforts. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go into what are called the 3 templates of the draft PIC model. So they go over the 3 main steps, which are, again, plan, implement, and close. And so what the plan template does essentially provide a guide for staff to plan their effective community engagement efforts. Again, community engagement is something that really needs to be done early. And so this planning process, really needs to be thought about early and thought about often. And so just, walking through some of the preliminary steps, it's really thinking about the goals and objectives for the CARB program, project, regulation, or project in terms of, who it impacts, what your overall goals are for the action, but also objectives when it comes to community engagement. What do you hope that will add to your CARB action? And then it goes through identifying which stakeholders to really include and involve in the process. And so there are a lot of tables and things like that that will help staff look at, really there are a lot of stakeholders that maybe they hadn't thought about that they should be involving in this process as well. And also goes into the level of engagement to be conducted, anywhere from informing all the way to co-creation, which is what we're hoping to do with this PIC model here. And going back to a lot of what Chanel was talking about, it's very important that staff also use data to really assess racial and social equity and think about who their CARB action is impacting, who it might be impacting more than others. And then from there, with all that information that has been gathered, they can really start planning their engagement strategies. And that includes assessing a lot of the logistics and accessibility needs that are needed throughout community engagement efforts. Next slide, please. So the second template is the implement template, and it pretty much guides staff on how to implement what they planned in the plan template. And so to really be effective in community engagement, there is really a lot to think about. So staff need to be organized throughout their CARB action. And so before, during, and after event, they need to be organized, and the implement template provides a lot of practical resources and context on how to do that. And so an example of that would be interpretation services, translation services, really where to go for that and how to incorporate it. Next slide, please. And so the last template is the close template. And before I really go into what that is, I do want to emphasize the graphic on the right here, which you've been seeing the last few slides. And our current thinking is that the PIC model is not going to be a linear model. It's not something, that you just check off, plan, implement, and close. Every part should feed into future community engagement efforts, should really feed back into, for instance, close back into plan or close back into implement. So what the close template aims to do is to close the loop with stakeholders. So some examples are thinking about how community recommendations influence the CARB program, project, or regulation, and if it didn't, why didn't it? And then some other examples would be surveys. So, we really want to know how we can do better and engage more effectively with communities. So thinking about internal surveys to talk with other staff to see how we think we did, but especially with our external community stakeholders to think, what did we do well? What didn't we do well? What could we do better? And all of this really goes, again, back into informing the agency as a whole and thinking about, are we doing effective community engagement? What could we be doing better? And so that could inform improvements for that specific CARB action, but also other CARB actions as we continue engaging with communities for years to come. So with that, I will pass it back to Lashe to see if there are any initial questions.
So now's the time to raise your hand, put your questions in the chat, or send us emails, and really start a discussion on the PIC model itself. to see if you guys have any questions. So I see we have our first question, and I'll apologize in advance of someone's name who gets butchered a lot. I apologize if I mess up anyone's name. Know that it happens to me also, and I apologize in advance. So first I see Charles Allen. You can unmute and ask your question. Oh, you're still muted. We can't hear you, Charles. Do you see the unmute button?
Yeah,
I
say
think
that
I'm
again.
unmuted.
Can you hear me?
It seems to
Sorry,
me,
it's Charles Allen first.
yeah, it seems to me that the most powerful thing that can possibly be done to be equitable to everybody is to take a very strong position about addressing, abating climate change or climate disruption, as it's probably more reasonably called. And I wondered what your thoughts are about what communities can do to further aggressive action, both locally and nationally, on abating climate change, which seems to me to be the most equitable thing you can possibly do for everybody in the community.
So my understanding from your question is how can we address climate change in a more equitable way for folks? I don't know if our Chanel would like to take this question, perhaps.
Sure. Thank you, Charles, so much for that question. I definitely appreciate it. I will say that I think that that is something that has been top of mind for the Air Resources Board and for the administration in terms of the abatement of climate change. I think part of what you're hearing from us tonight is that we're thinking about it, right? So we have a number of, I think, not only commitments that we've made, so we've recently adopted a 2022 scoping plan. We've done a number of things on the climate front, but we're also thinking about, as we're moving forward with our work on climate, how are we making sure that we're doing that? And not just climate, air pollution as well, but work for our whole agency and our mission is how are we doing that in a way where we really are thinking about our engagement with communities, how we do that, what that looks like, because so much of, right, when we're talking about climate change, so, it is the impact that it's having on communities, and we want to make sure that we're thinking about how we build that two-way communication and that it's not in its relationships and not transactions. And we're thinking about how we're integrating and addressing environmental justice and racial equity as a part of that. So I'm happy to talk with you offline if you really want to focus on kind of like what we're doing, particularly on climate. So we're doing a lot on that, and I'm happy to follow up on that part. But I think want to just emphasize that a lot of this for us too is the process of how we're getting there and how we're achieving those results too.
Thank you. I see another hand from Leslie Martinez. Please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Leslie Martinez with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. We're based in the San Joaquin Valley and in the Eastern Coachella Valley. So we work with a lot of rural communities, right? And a lot of communities who frankly have been kind of bearing the brunt of a lot of the pollution and a lot of the issues that I think we're all trying to address on this call today. So the first thing is I want to say thank you for putting together such a, I think this is the first time I've seen like a circular model that's like, we're going to come back to community and let you know kind of how you've influenced decisions. Like, I think that's a very big step for an agency to take. There are a few things though that I think I would like to talk to this body about specifically as a community engagement director myself. So the first one is I noticed that in the goals, which I thought were great, but one of them that for me is missing is CARB taking accountability for its history in part of why these communities are polluted, why they're overburdened, and why CARB has not taken action. I think a lot of the time state agencies overall come into community thinking that we're here to help you, so you should be, you should like us automatically, when in reality, a lot of agencies, in fact, have caused violence on communities and have affected the way that they, what land uses are and what they breathe. So I would really implore you to think through how you take accountability in meetings in a way that is respectful to communities who have been, bearing the brunt of the pollution for this state. And this goes, I think, is a statewide conversation that, like, maybe we're not ready for, but I think CARB, if we're starting, let's start off right. And that's the first step, is coming to, a consensus of like the pollution and the deaths that are part of CARB's lack of, or working with like industry, et cetera, et cetera. I just think it's really important for the communities that I work with. The other thing that I think is really important, I would love to know more about, is whenever I hear data, I think of data I would love to hear more about where that is coming from, how you're going to use it, because I think that data can be great, but I also think that data can sometimes remove a lot of the narrative that cannot be put into a number, right? So like, I know that's something we're all pretty aware of, but I do want to, like, in the San Joaquin Valley, for example, when kids cannot go outside for recess, right? Like, how are we going to talk about that? How do we talk about the kid that has never been outside for recess? Like, how do we, the number of industries that are actually clean, but in fact are on the backs of Black and brown people. So want to figure out, and just in general, like, how do we deal with that, right? Like, how does that fit into this data model? And wanting to make sure that while we're, we also like find space to make sure that there is room for qualitative, that there is room for the narrative. There's like space for us to allow people to talk about how, air pollution has affected their day-to-day lives. And then the other thing, before I'll take a step back to let others speak, is on this relationship versus transaction model. I think part of that too, and this also falls a little bit into the benefit, who gets the benefit, who has the burden. But a lot, I want to implore that when we say relationships, right, we mean relationships, and who are we having the relationship with? I think that I'm sure y'all have a better, this is just like some of the stuff that came to my head was, what does a relationship look like with a community you have never been to? And how do you approach that situation? How do you approach your relationship with community-based organizations? And also, how do you pay for the labor? One of the issues that I've constantly run into throughout agency work is, I think everything y'all do is so important. Like, it's incredibly important. However, there is an issue sometimes, because a lot of the times Black and brown, Indigenous, just BIPOC communities will often get told, well, that's not cost efficient. But the reason things have been cost efficient for so long is because we have been dumping in Black and brown, Indigenous neighborhoods. So therefore, how do we have the conversation about things are like, it's not going to be cheap to engage people that don't know you, have never heard of your agency, and maybe you're going to take a time to come to your meeting for whatever reason. So how do you invest in communities to build that relationship? And I'll step back. Sorry, I know I talked a lot, but thank you so much, and for allowing for the space, and excited to hear from colleagues in this call.
Thank you so much for sharing all the things you did, Leslie. There's a lot there, and I'm gonna not do it full justice in reiterating what I've heard, but know that a lot of the points that you made, well, one, it's being recorded, we have note takers, things will not fall through the cracks. But I think the main topics that I'm hearing for us to respond to are accountability. How is accountability taken into account in terms of our model? Also, how is the data going to be used and how it's collected? Also, relationships. What do these relationships look like? How are we building them, and how are we paying folks? And so, Jonathan, do you want to respond to how those are being handled in the model specifically?
Yeah, I'll touch on some of that, and then it looks like I might be passing it off to Chanel or Heather to answer some of the other questions. I mean, those are all, very good points you bring up. I think it's a lot that we really have to think about in terms of accountability for CARB and, what CARB and other agencies have done in the past. That is absolutely something to think about. For the narrative part of the model, we definitely want to include a lot of information there that will really paint the best picture we can for CARB staff as to why community engagement is so important and how it ties to racial equity. In terms of data, I mean, we're open to any suggestions from you all. Again, it is currently, I think, the fourth step of the plan model, and it, will tie into the racial equity assessment lens that Chanel brought up as well. Some of the examples of data to use our Columbine screen and census data, but there's a much longer list that I can't think of off the top of my head, but we definitely want to include the best tools that we can.
And hi all, I'm Heather Arias. I am the Transportation and Toxics Division Chief here at CARB. What does that mean? My division is the division that writes the rules for the freight equipment in the state. So ocean-going vessels, locomotives, things that many of your communities are having to deal with every day. We also are the division that writes rules for non-diesel toxics. So it's my staff that is working on a chrome plating rule that'll be heard by the board next week. So I'm kind of working with the talented CARB staff you see here today to try and do better. So, I would like to say that we 100% acknowledge that we have not done right by the communities. We have a lot more work we have to do. We have a lot more work to do to help make the air you breathe truly safe for what you are entitled to. We have a lot more work to do to build partnerships with you, but we don't know how, which is why we're here tonight, to learn from you, to learn from the community experts. And on the point about data, one of the things that I want to touch on and make sure I lift up is the comment about the qualitative data, because I'm sure many of you that have worked with us over the years know that we are, we'll get hung up on our spreadsheets. We love our spreadsheets. We're CARB staff. We love our numbers. But the qualitative data of how the communities feel, how they are living, what they are smelling and dealing with every day of their life is also extremely important data source that we need to learn how to incorporate and work with you all on that. So I just wanted to highlight all those, introduce myself, and thank you so much for everybody being here this evening. And I will stop talking now because we have a lot of hands up. Lashe.
Thank you. The next hand that I see is from Dr. Francine Upta.
That was a nice try, Oputa.
Sorry, thank you.
No problem. You can
For the
just say
grace.
Dr. Francine, that works. I want to say to Ms. Martinez, yes, yes, and yes. I appreciate those comments. I also want to comment on appreciation for the loop and the close part. One question I do have, and you may have addressed it and I missed it, is this then an ongoing process that you go back and start again and keep going and going and building on that? That's the one question. And then the other thing I just want to affirm is, and so appreciate the importance of stories. Stories are data, and the stories of the people are critical. So thank you for addressing that.
Thank you for your comment. I see that there are 3 more hands raised. I want to say in the interest of time, I will note your names, and so that when we have the next open session for Q&A, I'll call on you guys first, so feel free to raise your hands again. But I think in the interest of time, we're going to start moving on to the next questions, but note that there will be other opportunities to speak. So I'm seeing Lonnie, I'm seeing Richard, and I'm seeing Cheryl and Angie.
Yeah, and to answer your question, it's definitely a continuous process, this PIC model. It's not,
Thank
not
you.
all the time. Yes.
All right, shall we go back to sharing screen, Bobby? All right, next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so we want to hear a little bit more from you. So this will be another opportunity for discussion. We have a few quick questions. The first one is in form of a poll. So we want to know from you, on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being very poorly and 5 being very well, how well do you think CARB currently engages with community stakeholders across California? All right, so our poll has launched. Please let us know. All right, looks like our answers are slowing down. Let's end the poll and share results. All right, so as you can see, based on the answers, CARB definitely has a lot of work to do, and we really thank you for your honest responses. And I think that these answers really indicate how important it is for us to co-develop this model with you so that we are doing better and conducting community engagement in a way that is truly helpful and productive for the communities that we serve. So now let's open it up for some open discussion questions. And we'd really like to hear from you. First, how do CARB actions impact you and your community?
Lonnie, Mason, feel free to unmute.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was waiting for the unmute button. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yes, my name is Lonnie Mason. I'm actually the Executive Director of First Generation Environmental Health and Economic Development, and we're based out of the Bayview Hunters Point community. Appreciate Ms. Martinez and her comments and what she had to say, you know, and holding yourself accountable for your actions. We know that it's very important for CARB to monitor and make sure that the people in their community throughout the state are living in a healthy environment, and that is not polluted. And it's their responsibility to penalize, you know, refineries or whoever who go above and beyond that and do not, how can I say it, abide by the rules that are out there, that they must protect the people. First generation for some time, you know, it's right there in the heart of the Bayview Hunters Point community, born and raised, Black community has been overlooked quite a bit. And it seems like whenever we reach out and we try to engage, we're the last on the totem pole. For some reason, I don't understand that. We looking at the situation, we've been asking for a tour for over 2 years. Like Leslie said, how can you know about our community if you have not visited or taken a chance to see what we're dealing with or suffering? She's right. And so that's what we've been trying to do. Fortunately enough, we've been working with them now, but we've been overlooked. We've been passed. It was okay for you to go to other groups and tour their cities, before first generation when we asked some years ago, why are we put on the back burner? Why are we the last one? Why is it difficult to come make that tour in the Bayview Hunters Point community? This is what we're talking about. You know, we're excluded, we're not included. And I don't understand why is there always a problem within the Bayview Hunters Point community. And I'm sure every community would say the same thing for them, but I'm speaking about Bayview Hunters Point and what we're dealing with. Everybody knows the situation. This is a Superfund site over there. The Cowler Bio screen is, you know, it's not doing its work. It's not hitting, you know, some of the, you know, really toxic area. Yes, they hit the naval shipyard, but when it comes to certain areas that are polluting, like the sewage factory, you know, or what about the homeless shelter that sits between a cement factory that has not been permitted in over 20 years, or Recology, the garbage company that been operating, you know, for, you know, some years, maybe 5 to 7 years without a permit, the same way it is a cement factory. We can't, when it comes to issues and situations like that, they need to be slapped on the hand. They need to be penalized. You should not follow what city officials say in this situation. Whatever they're saying or whatever they're doing, if they're wrong, you hit them. You let them know that they're wrong in their action. Because I don't understand the problem. Going at the city official. They not, you know, they not beyond me, you know, as far as being corrected or reprimanded for doing what's not right. And another thing is, I don't care, you know, we have other organizations, grassroots organizations who claim they're about environmental justice, but yet, if you go out of the way and fund them, you know, for putting a homeless shelter, you're not even aware of them putting a homeless shelter in a toxic area. You have to pay attention. You have to know the community. You have to make the effort to visit the community to see who the grassroots organizations are involved in that community, especially the Black community. And I'm sorry, you know, I'm not against anyone else, but it seems like we're the last. We're the last one all the time. And we're the ones that's suffering. If you do statistical data around, you will see who is suffering more than most. And that's mainly the Black community, especially in the Bayview Hunters Point. Once upon a time had the largest breast cancer rate in the whole country. People are still dying. People are still, you know, dying due to various diseases. We have an issue there. So CARB knows what's going on. They've heard of me. They've heard me talk many a times. And we shouldn't have to keep talking like this over and over and over. You have this forum here to listen. This is the time to take some action, to do what's right, to do the right thing, not just come and check the box and say, oh, we engage, you know, with such and such or with such and such. No, do the right thing. Do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie, for sharing about your community. I just want to hand it over to Chanel to see if she wanted to speak on this a little bit before we take the other hands.
Sure. First, I want to thank you, Lonnie, so much. And I want to say that I think, particularly on this point of accountability that you brought up, I know that Leslie has brought up and that we've kind of heard as a theme. Really, I think, so I think it was Miss Margaret. Miss Margaret had shared with me at one point, she said, you know, we're not just talking about, like you said, Lonnie, checking the box, right? Or, you know, we did this outreach thing, we heard you, and now we're going to go back and figure out what the solution is. But it's really about how are we righting a wrong? And so I can't, you know, and I think part of when I started this conversation off, I think what I acknowledged was that we wanted to note that like people have had experiences with this, right? And they, whether it's positive or challenging, we can't pretend like that didn't happen. We can't act like we didn't do what we didn't do. But I think what we can do, and I think what everyone's saying is acknowledge, hey, here is where we haven't shown up. Here is where we haven't done what we were supposed to do, what we should have done. And so Lonnie, I think you are absolutely right. I want to apologize because I know that when we talked about the tour, you know, I wasn't here. Was I here 2 years ago? I can't even do math. But I know that that's something that you have brought up persistently. I'm very glad that we finally have the tour scheduled. We'll be up there February 2nd. And I want to thank you for your persistence. But I agree with you that it shouldn't have to be this process where it's repetitive and going back and back and back. And so that's part of what I think why we're having this public forum. Part of what we want to do is shift away from these kind of like arbitrary systems that I think seem to favor other people over others, and really be transparent, really think through what does that accountability look like? How do we do that in partnership? How do we start to right the wrongs together? And I think that's why we're kicking off this process. That's why we wanted to have this forum. And so I think I do want to say that, you know, I know it feels like in some ways like, wow, why did it take CARB forever to do this? And I think we've had to do our own like internal learning and growing in this. But I do want to say that we are making a commitment. We are standing strong in this, and we are saying very clearly that this is not just a priority, it's not just a talking point, but it means that we have to shift what we do. And that is going to be uncomfortable. That is going to be challenging. So, and I think, and the other part that I wanted to get to just really quickly is that when we use this term accountability, I also want to make sure that we have shared understanding of what accountability looks like, what we're taking responsibility for, because there's a lot of things, right? And we are government actors, and there's a lot that government has done. So I think part of what we need to do, and part of what we can't do on our own, we have to do in partnership, is really be clear on what are we seeing. And so I think part of it, as I point out, it is being in communities. We're not doing it on our own, but working in partnership. It is, I think, learning from and listening and creating structures and systems that are transparent, that people can engage, and that we can work collaboratively together to do this. So we're not going to solve it all tonight. And that was never, I think, my intention. But my intention was to make sure that we're giving a space to hear others, and that we really are thinking about and talking about how we can do this together and what does that look like. And I do think I want to say again that, like, I think accountability is going to be a huge part of that.
Thank you. Before I call on Cheryl, I noticed that Richard Falcon took his hand down, but wanted to give you an opportunity to speak since you were in the queue beforehand.
No, it would be really just echoing what so many have already said. So I'll turn it back over to those to speak. Powerful discussions. Thank you all for being here. I'm learning from listening to all of you.
Thank you. Next, we have Cheryl Patton.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I was late and missed so much of this really important conversation. But my role at where I work is biomonitoring and communities of concern. And so when we do go to a community, we be testing serum, urine, we might be testing air, we might be testing water, we might be testing soil, we might be testing dust. And how that is decided is meeting closely with communities and find out what is the problem? What is the problem first off? And then what kind of data would be useful in turning off the tap and taking the handle off the pump? What kind of data will turn that around? And so that's the starting point always for us, working closely with the community and deciding what those problems are and what would really work to stop those problems. That's the primary thing. And then agencies like CARB stand by to help do that. There may be other sources of funding to test other things as well. But clearly we know that industry is not living up to promises that they have made in the past. We try to find ways to make the polluter pays. And if people are being, one of the concerns is illness. It's very difficult to associate an exposure to a particular illness. But if we know people are being exposed to carcinogens, or to chemicals that lower the immune system, or chemicals that are related to thyroid problems or infertility, then require often the company to start screening people regularly to get an early onset sense of what people's health problems are and how that they may be being caused by releases from a particular industry. So that's where I work, and I've been watching a little bit of what CARB has done, and think there's so many opportunities there, and I would like to help in any way I can. Usually when we meet with the communities, we make sure the communities, they control the data, that's theirs. They get to decide where to use it, how to use it, and move it forward. It's very much there. And that they thank themselves because what they are doing is for the community itself currently and for future generations. And if we can, we try to raise funds as well for community participation. So everybody's time is paid for when they get involved in all this stuff. So, because it's so incredibly important, it just has to stop some of the pollution these communities are experiencing. It's absolutely outrageous. So I'm just here to meet with you all and learn more and offer any experiences I have or ideas I have. I work at a place called Commonweal, has a Commonweal cancer help program, and helps people with cancer become healthy cancer patients. That's my background. And when I work for communities, we do not charge for that. Just so you know, so I am available. I love to work more closely with you all. And I've had some good conversations with many people at CARB. I like to work with CARB as well, if that would be useful to you. And I should say I'm based in Bolinas, California, which is over on the coast, a little tiny community. So that's where my office is, but I travel a lot. And so I have worked with firefighters, farm workers in the Central Valley, farmers up in Montana and Wyoming, and so on. So I work on the ground. That's where I work. Yeah.
Thank you, Cheryl, for sharing about biomonitoring and ways that you can help. Part of today's presentation will be exactly on how you can get more involved. So I appreciate you talking about your availability. I noticed that Angie Balderas put her hand down, but wanted to give you a platform since you had your hand raised earlier. Okay, next we have Kevin Hamilton. Feel free to unmute.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been a very intense conversation, as it needs to be. I don't want to echo the truths that so many people have put on the table tonight. So I'll tell my own. So here in Fresno, as a registered respiratory therapist working in the underserved clinics here in the county clinics, we recognized 15, 20 years ago that our asthma rates were getting out of hand, and the air pollution was getting worse and worse in our communities everywhere. And so we felt, myself and some of my colleagues, a pediatrician who was dedicated as well, and a family practice doctor and a pulmonologist, trekked to CARB in Sacramento because we felt like if we just could talk to the people responsible for that and provide them with the information, they'd make changes that were so obviously needed. And we went and we met with the board chair at that time. I'm not going to mention her name, but at any rate, and the pediatrician said, "I'm horrified. I'm having to give kids that are 5 and 6 years old steroids at rates that I would never have conceived of. And I'm worried about how they're developing." And the family practice doctor said, "I've got so many older folks and elders who are sick with COPD and sick with asthma who shouldn't have it at this age. And again, I'm having to provide medications to them that they can't even get most of the time because, they don't have insurance and aren't in care programs. And so they're ending up in the hospital. And the pulmonologist is saying the same story. And I'm seeing them in the ICUs and in the trauma center. And they shouldn't be there because they have diseases that are totally controlled and preventable, but are mostly being triggered by the outdoor environment." And she turned around and told us that, well, we were wrong and the data didn't support what we were saying, and that it wasn't the agency's job to fix these problems. And in fact, she was quite sure that the two were not related. So you can imagine how we felt that day. So I think that's why some of us are still here today instead of sitting in the clinic taking care of our patients, where we often feel we'd be so much happier. I will say that since then, I've seen change in the right direction. Is it where it needs to be? No. Is every community recognized and given what it needs to create change? No. Can that be done? I'm not really sure if it's possible. Is there an incredible amount of work ahead of us still? Absolutely. I will say that I saw the organization, the agency, show up almost 4 years ago now in the oil fields down in Kern. And I watched their executive director be so amazed when he stood on in a park called Panorama Park. And the panorama you're looking at is 5 square miles of haze and oil derricks. And they call it a park. And that's where you're supposed to go with your kids, at this park. And the haze rising over it, you can smell on a hot day from the park. And the river for everybody to run along is running alongside that oil field with a screen of trees beside it, because that makes a difference. And the city of almost 1 million people is sitting right below it. I mean, these are the kind of things that makes you wonder, what is the agency doing to change this? And for CARB and climate, for good or bad, you guys have been given the job. You have the scoping plan. So that scoping plan is supposed to direct all the folks who create these scenarios to stop and move forward. Yet it feels like you continually step back from that right there when I feel like, hey, we've got it, we're going to make it here. And that's happened again and again and again. And so the change, instead of being dramatic and as aggressive and as it can be, and the tools are there to do it, everything's there, again, step back. So here's another effort that I really appreciate, I think has potential. And, I'm curious to see how far you're willing to step this time. So we have to step hard, far, and fast and keep moving. We look at the past to learn, right? That's where we gain our knowledge. We live in today, but we have to look at a better future. And we have to step harder, faster, and move more aggressively than we ever had before to change these things. And the argument that we're constantly talking about, where we're going to hurt the economy, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I always think of that park as where the billionaires come to stand and look at their money. So they only come there for a minute, because when they show up in a town hall meeting, they fly in jets from Texas to tell a local city government that they can't pass a regulation that says, hey, you can only run that operation between 7 in the morning and 11 at night, because people are living next to it and they want to go to sleep, and their kids, have to get up in the morning and go to school. So, that's the reality that we live in, that we see every day. So we need powerful friends to change that. And, we look at you as potentially one of them. And probably the strongest one, the biggest one in the pack, whether, again, you like it or not. It's the role that you have. So, you heard a lot of stories tonight. We heard the story of Bayview's Hunters Point, which is the poster child for this, the idea that you would have Superfund sites where you even potentially have nuclear waste, and you have, as was pointed out, cancer rates that are through the ceiling. You have areas like the Valley south from Madeira, where you have asthma rates that have climbed in 20 years higher and faster than in any other part of the country. Kentucky used to have the highest rates. Now, just over a very short period of time, we've seen this escalation. And what do we have to look at? What can we say? We can say that we've seen the oil and gas industry, grow at the same exponential rate. We've seen the dairy and ag industry grow at the same exponential rate, and the population and the traffic around here grow the same way. What else happened that could create that kind of change? If you can point at anything else, we'll go after it. But I can't see a damn thing out there other than that could affect this kind of change and create these kinds of problems. You guys are stuck with regulating a big piece of that, and we're counting on you to do your job. So that's about it. Thank you for your time tonight, though.
Thank you, Kevin. Really want to take a moment to emphasize the appreciation in you guys telling the stories of your communities. It is not easy to hear, but it's much harder to live, right? And we just want to say thank you for sharing and really wanting to honor the stories that you guys are sharing with us. I do want to say that at 7:20, we're going to take a break, given the weight of what we're talking about and how much we have to get through. So I'll call on the next speaker, but note that our goal is to take a break, a 5-minute break at 7:20. So next we have Dominique Brooks. Feel free to unmute.
Hi, thank you. My name is Dominique Brooks. I am the Executive Director of Healing Impacted Communities. We're located in Bella Vista, which is the Rodale area. And I wanted to say, I completely agree with Lonnie and everyone from community on today on the fact that there's still an ongoing issue of low income communities being historically excluded while we're impacted the most. And so to add to that, I just wanted to highlight that it's not enough just to have discussions and hear our concerns in these meetings because the community needs real change. As we know, we need real involvement and real engagement. And so far on CARB's end, there has been a lack when it comes, you guys have lacked when it comes to meaningful engagement within low income, overburdened, disadvantaged communities of color, while we sit back and watch CARB support other communities. And so my community, Bella Vista, has actually met with CARB. I know Lonnie spoke about having to fight to even get a toxic tour, but we actually have done a toxic tour with CARB, and we still are invisible. And CARB has witnessed the several heavy polluters, and we've come to many meetings. And so we've done our part, but we still haven't gotten much support from or involvement from CARB. And so today I just really wanted to highlight that, and because I am hopeful that from what I'm hearing tonight, that we can start to actually build a partnership and truly make an impact for my community and communities like mine, specifically those of color, and actually build partnership, like I said, and not just talk about it and continue to hear our concerns, but actually put things into real action. So thank you so much for your time. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. I'm not sure if that's on my end, but thank you for your time.
Thank you for sharing, Dominique. And after the break, I think we want to speak directly to your question of how can we make this real and what does this look like going forward? And so with that, I think we'll take a 5-minute break. Folks with their hands raised know that there will be other opportunities in the and during our presentation today for an open discussion. And so feel free to keep your hands raised.
We'll see you back here at 7:26. Thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you so much. For those of you who are still here, we really appreciate it. For those of you who have shared your experiences so far, we are so very grateful to hear your experiences, to hear about your community stories, and we really value that expertise that you bring. So we feel that in this next part, we are going to talk about how we can really partner with you and really put that expertise into practice, so that we can do better as an agency and really make all those improvements that you all have expressed to us today. So in this next section, I'm going to pass it on to Jose Lopez, and he's going to talk to us about those community partnerships and contracts that we hope to build with you so that you can not only share that expertise with us, but also be fairly compensated for it. So with that, I'm passing it on to Jose.
Great. Thank you, Diane. Hi, everyone. I hope you had a chance to practice some self-care during the break. Maybe grab water or stretch. As Diane mentioned, I'm Jose Lopez. I am an air pollution specialist at CARB. And as the next part of the presentation, I will be providing some details about our grant-writing process that is going to help inform this process of developing, co-developing the PIC model with community experts and the general public as well. So some of you may be wondering what is exactly grant-writing, and we're defining it as a process to inform the development of this PIC model with the lived and on-the-ground experiences from community experts. And this is a critical phase that is going to help us build and improve the PIC model with the voices and knowledge that all of you have already shared with us. So this is very valuable, and I have learned a lot. And so part of the collaboration with community members is one of the only ways that we can be successful in developing these types of models. And it is also an opportunity for us at CARB to lead by example. So part of this grant-writing process will essentially have two parts. The first one is contracting with up to 15 community stakeholders, and they will be compensated for the time and expertise. While the other part of this effort will be a broader way of working with communities across California to defend through a series of public meetings. Next slide, please. The next slide. So I just went over this and sort of because kind of had a delay there. Thank you. All right, and as I mentioned, we really value your expertise and definitely would like to learn from you as we co-create the PIC model. So as I mentioned in the last slide, the grant-writing process will include two parts. Again, the community expert meetings and the community meetings that we will be having in the next few months. And so you can see this in these two boxes, and beginning with the box on the left, our goal here is what we're calling with the community expert work group is to create the PIC model with those that have in-depth knowledge of community engagement. And anyone that would like to be considered for this group will have to submit 3 requirements and an application form, a statement of interest, and a resume. And as part of the selection process, we have also created a detailed scoring criteria that is going to help us select the 15 community experts that will be contracted for the time and expertise. I also want to highlight here for this work group that part of being an expert in this work group will require attendance and active engagement at 4 virtual meetings that we will have, plus time to review required materials and other in the earlier draft of the PIC model that we have so far. Now, moving on to the community meetings portion of it, this is where we want to hear from as many residents and communities as we can. So some of you have already expressed, interest in doing that. So this is an opportunity to do that outside of the community experts. And so knowing that we can create a great community engagement model with community voices, that's why it's important that we hear all of your recommendations from you. And so these public meetings will be consisting of 6 in-person meetings across the state and will be open to everyone that would like to attend. We will also have a virtual meeting for those that aren't able to travel to an in-person meeting. And so we want to denote as well that we have not determined the exact times, dates, and locations for any of these meetings yet. And if you have any recommendations, we will definitely would like to hear from you about this as well. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we definitely want to be For those that want to be part of the community expert work group, you will have to submit a resume, an application, and the statement of interest to be considered. In the statement of interest, we're asking the applicants answer 4 questions, and you will be able to find questions and more details about our solicitation process in the landing page that we have created. Staff will be posting the link to the solicitation in the chat, so you can refer to that. Specifically, we're looking for community experts that have a vision for how CARB can improve community engagement and be willing to share that vision throughout the process. We have heard some good suggestions and recommendations from you and experiences, so we really appreciate that. The other requirement that we're looking for in community experts is to have at least 2 years of community engagement experience, and that can be from a number of different things, such as your lived experience in your community, working on campaigns, engaging with communities or various stakeholders, or working in coalitions, and any other participation in community work. In addition to that, we're looking for community experts that also have some experience working with CARB or other local government agencies. So those are some requirements that we're just kind of looking for in some of the community experts. And so lastly, for this slide, I just want to share that last week we released a solicitation to contract with 15 community experts, and we'll be accepting applications through March 16. The application packets, as mentioned, could be submitted to the community engagement at arv.ca.gov email. And I also, again, would like to point you to the solicitation landing page for more complete details. And also, I'll be happy to take on any questions related to this. So at this point, I'll just pause here and ask Lashe to help field questions about maybe what I covered or previous portions of the presentation.
So I just want to assure Richard Long, Mauro Libre, Laura Hayder, Leslie Martinez, Charles Freeman, Kim McCoy, and LaDonna Williams that I will call on you guys during the open discussion. So I have your names in that order. Send us a chat if I've missed your name, but for those folks, note that you have been recorded and we will call you during the open discussion. I think right now in the presentation, we want to focus on how do we pay folks for their expertise, which we've been hearing and is very important. So if we can shift to, for this moment, talking about questions for ground truthing, and note that for the open discussion, I will call on you guys first. So maybe if you have put down those hands and then re-raise your hands if it's about the ground truthing period specifically. Is that fair? Okay, I'm not. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so I will start with calling on Laura Hayder, sorry.
Despite all the public comments and from all races, how come there's still a large increase in the number of oil wells drilled last quarter in within the 3,200-foot setback zone from sensitive populations, mostly people of color, and all the participation didn't accomplish anything? Maybe, I guess we just call more people. That's all we can do. Thanks.
Thank you. Noted conversation about oil wells. Okay, next question relating to ground truthing. Going to call on Charles Freeman. Feel free to unmute.
Are you calling on me?
Yes.
I wanted to emphasize that the air quality has to do not only with the pollutants that are related to oil and gas industry and so forth, but also towards materials in the atmosphere that don't cause diseases, but are extremely problematic. And I'm speaking of carbon dioxide. Now, to me, the California Air Resources Board should be looking at all components in the air, And when I first moved to Southern California, the air quality was so bad that I could hardly see down the block. And there have just been tremendous improvements. But in more recent years, there have been terrible degradation from climate change. The droughts, the flooding, the problems that affect everyone in California should be addressed by the Air Resources Board as well as air pollution. Now, I'm incredibly sympathetic with those that have problems because of the air quality, the air pollution, which causes diseases and problems because there are harmful materials in the atmosphere that actually harm the human body. But that's not the case with carbon dioxide. I just wonder how much the Air Resources Board is focused on climate change that's caused by carbon dioxide. It seems to me that that is an incredibly important issue equitably throughout the community, not just local things like refineries that are affecting the local community. And I hope that Air Resources Board will work with communities and show them how they can be effective in setting climate change as a high priority and getting action nationwide that will solve that problem. I understand that it's not something that the California Air Resources Board can do alone, but it's an extremely important part of air quality, and I hope that Air Resources Board will focus on it. And I'm curious to know what's being done now.
I just want to say thank you both to Charles and Laura for bringing up these topics of the oil wells and also of climate change. And I think highlighting things like our scoping plan and also wanting to follow up with you guys offline. I don't want to be dismissive about these topics. They're obviously incredibly important. And so thank you for sharing about those two topics. The next person I see in line is Kimberly McCoy.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. Thankful for the presentation and very thankful for this rich conversation. I know CARB staff has heard many stories tonight about our communities and what we deal with when we have industrial facilities placed in them, the type of health impacts that we as residents are affected with. I just want to share a little story. It's my personal story. And then I have an ask of CARB. As a young girl growing up in the west side of Fresno, California, which is saturated with a lot of industrial facilities, I had asthma. I was about 8 years old. I had a really bad asthma attack, and I was placed inside an oxygen tank where my parents had to put their hands in the gloves to be able to touch me. I was in there for 3 weeks. That was terrifying for me. They didn't think that I was going to make it. My parents, my mom, single mom with 2 kids, I'm her oldest child. She couldn't just up and move away from West Fresno because she was a single parent with 2 kids. So that was a hardship on us. And she had to make the decision to quit her job in order for me to be sitting here talking to you all tonight. As a parent of he just turned 11. I want him to be small again, but my son just turned 11. As a parent of an 11-year-old son who also has asthmatic, who also was born in West Fresno, I had to make the decision do I stay in West Fresno and keep exposing my son to these industrial facilities, all the toxins in the air, all the drippings from the trucks that are coming from these industrial facilities around us, or do I move? Which has caused a hardship on us as well. But I'm looking at it from a mother's point of view, and I'm looking at the blueprint that my mother laid down for me. So my ask is that we need to start holding these elected officials accountable. We need CARB and our air district to be involved in these land use decisions. We need you to step up. If you have communities asking you to come take a tour of their community to see what they deal with on a daily basis, I think you guys are obligated to do that. I don't think you guys should be putting them off because we matter. As we took a tour in Fresno and we talked about it, we went to the community of Mendota. I believe that they said 2 out of 5 kids that have been born there since 2000 has Down syndrome. So it has to be something going on in the air. And this small community is surrounded by biomass facilities, industrial facilities, all type of things that they're breathing in on a daily basis. So we need CARB to step up. We need CARB to have a seat at the table when it comes down to our communities and our land use decisions. We need them to be present or send a letter, however you guys want to do it, but we need you guys to be our champions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, for sharing your story and for emphasizing exactly what we have to do. Really appreciate that. Next, we see Leslie Martinez.
Hi, yeah, can we actually put up the requirements? Sorry, because I think that these requirements are actually like a perfect example of like how we continue to use the same rules and the same expectations that have brought us to this situation. And I think that what we can do is actually make this a more community friendly like process where we actually bring people who are brand new, because like what we've been working on doesn't work. I don't know how to get those requirements on up there. Sorry, I didn't have the time to take them. Is that possible?
Bobby, can we put up slide 28, please? I think that's, oh, is that the requirements? Let's see, is it slide 28?
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. So like the first thing that I want to talk about, like in real in-depth knowledge of community engagement, like that just like the way that we're talking about it makes it seem like this like scholar thing when in reality it's just like community members. Like I really think that when you say like must apply, submit a statement of interest in our resume, like residents that I work with that know so much more about their communities and know what is happening and what is needed in those communities do not have resumes. Like a lot of these people are working class people, and like if you want to get real people who are going to give you real expertise that you cannot purchase, it cannot be a paid advocate. Like you need to be able to meet people where they're at. That means understanding, like maybe it's like figuring out a system where they work with somebody to understand like how they apply. Ask community-based organizations, what organizations do you work with that work with community leaders? Like I think people who are leading a community expert group should live in the community that you are trying to serve. The other thing that I think is incredibly important is that one of the requirements that has worked with CARB before that is incredibly limiting, and it really hurts the people that can be part of this process. It hurts people that are trying to engage in these processes that have historically tried to single them out because of white supremacy, because of colonialism, because of imperialism. And if we really want to change that narrative, we need to completely change the way we seek expertise and what we think about what is expertise. So those are some of the first suggestions that I would make right off the bat in terms of like how we bring in people to this space. I think that it's really important that we ground in real communities because there are a lot of leaders that want to be involved in this work, but these are the type of barriers that we're talking about that limit them from being part of these boards. The other thing I want to talk about is in terms of the community meeting. I know you said not contracted, open to everyone, but like there are also things that you have to understand that like these are working class neighborhoods, and that means that Tuesday from 6 to 9, like that is those 3 hours are so important to like growing up. My parents were farm workers. Those 3 hours are like recharge. That's when people make dinner, make lunch for the next day, homework. And it's like, you need to make sure you're providing childcare. You need to make sure there's dinner at these things, water, like these are important things to think about. And then the other part of it is I am, as a San Joaquin Valley, like lifelong resident, I am offended. And I'm also offended for the communities in the Eastern Coachella Valley because 3 northern, 3 southern completely erases the San Joaquin Valley, who are bearing this brunt. And I understand that it's like you divide it in half, but we cannot think about it that way. We have to genuinely be intentional about where we are hosting these meetings. We have to think about transportation, because oftentimes you will put a meeting in Fresno without any consideration to folks who are above Fresno and under Fresno and to the east and the west. And we have to start thinking about this in ways that are true. And I understand the Zoom thing, but at the end of the day, like, I work with communities that do not have internet and that do not have transportation. So like, if we really want to make this a ground truthing process, like, I really think we should go back to the drawing board and figure out who we actually want to talk to, what we want to ask them for their expertise from, and like how we work with them. And I don't think that we should be like, oh, we're only going to do these meetings. I think you're supposed to ask the community expert group, how do we have these meetings? Where is the best way to have these meetings? What interpretation? Like, even as a community advocate, like, there are language, like, I do not speak indigenous languages. So like, you should add, like, that's why you can have community expert groups where you actually find out that there's a portion of Fresno that speaks Punjabi only, or that speaks Mixteco. Like, this is exactly why, like, we need to have this conversation beginning with the expert working group. Thank you. Sorry.
All of the things you said are things that we need to hear, and appreciate the passion at which you're coming at us with, and appreciate the the action items that you're coming at us with. There's a number of things here that you said, and I want different folks to speak to different parts of it, about things like the location, about things like who we're compensating, and who these experts are. So first I'll hand it over to Chanel, and then I'll hand it over to Lana to talk a little bit more about the locations.
I think that's right. And so first of all, Leslie, and this is actually for everyone, there's a deep appreciation here, because I know that, I don't want people to feel like they have to parade their trauma to CARB for us to care. I think that's not the intent here, and that's not the goal. And so I appreciate people sharing their experiences and letting us know. I want people to know that this is not meant to be a siloed effort, that it's just like, ooh, this EJ group is going to kick this off, or these people here. It's really meant to be transformative for our agency. And so I think all of the comments that we're hearing, it's not just going to live here. It's really going to go back and shape, and it's going to go all the way up to our executive officer and all the way down to all of our divisions, because it's, again, like I mentioned at the very top, it's really about how are we shifting and changing. Leslie, I think you've been very honest and transparent. So I want to give the same energy back to you. And part of what I want to just be really honest about is that the challenges that we face as a government agency really do come down to our contracting limitations. And so part of what I think we are kind of excited about, right? The things that you brought up in terms about self-determination, right? In terms of location, in terms of language, access, in terms of how are we reaching those that, for example, don't have time to come to these meetings, right? Don't have these like resumes and these different pieces. All of that are things I think you're absolutely right, that we do want, I think, this group to help us think through and to form through. And so part of what we're trying to balance here is that, and I mean, if you want the state manual on contracting, I'm happy to drop it in the chat for you. I don't think you probably want to read that, but because of some of those things that we're governed by, we're trying to figure out how do we not let that be an excuse? Because I think that oftentimes we can just come to meetings and say, we're limited by contracts, we can't figure it out, we're sorry. And what we're actually trying to do is figure out how do we bring together a group that can help us think creatively through those challenges. So I did want to just note that again, I think we're not looking to come to you with excuses and say, oh, we can't do this for this reason. We're really looking to kind of be transparent in terms of like, here are some of the challenges that we're facing and that we're seeing right now. How can we work collaboratively with others to figure out how to address those? And I think to the point that I think you raised actually at the very beginning about how do we not come to this space and I think extract labor and not basically compensate for that. We're trying to also address that in terms of saying that we don't want this to be an extractive experience. And I think that money is not the only piece of that, but money is some of that. And so we are trying to figure out how do we make sure that we're compensating for the expertise that you're providing, and we're leveraging, I think, the knowledge that you and others have to really think about how we're doing this outreach in a way that honestly is authentic. So with that said, I'm happy to turn it back over to you, Lashe, and to kind of coordinate with the others. I know have responses to that.
Can I really quickly though, like Chanel, thank you. Like I love when people are blunt and to the point. It is one of my favorite things in the world. But I do want to like reference like those are things that I think that are missing and cause this miscommunication is like, what are the barriers that you are facing to get to what we want? And I don't think we've had that conversation with CBOs and agencies. And I think that's where a lot of this gets stuck. And it because I feel like a broken record, and I know you feel like your hands are tied, right? So it's like, I want to get to this point where it's like, what can we, I'm kind of drawing a little bit to like the chat that was in here earlier, but it's like, what else can CBOs do to really facilitate this conversation in a way that comes with actionable items? Like, I don't want to complain. I want to get the people that I know that would be amazing for this expert group to you so that you can formulate your own relationship with them. But how do I do that in a way that like, they don't have a resume? That all falls on a community-based organization. And a lot of the times, like Phoebe, my co-director often says like on the eighth day, God created CBOs to like try to deal with some of these things. And we need to know clearly what you need from us so that we can help you facilitate that. Because there are people who can serve on these boards that meet all the requirements and that CBOs might be able to sponsor or, whatever it may be. But like, we want guidelines to figure out how we get in this space. Right. So I really appreciate this conversation. Like, I've always wanted someone to tell me like, why can't you do this in a way that's like, this is why. And it's like, yeah, okay, how do we get around it? Like, let's figure it out, because those are the conversations we need to be having, because I don't want you to hear the issues from West Fresno from me when you can hear them from like Miss Katie Taylor, who can tell you from her first day there, right? Like, and how she engages her community to come to her house. Like, that's where you get expertise that I can never give you. So thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation.
I think I think Heather's going to talk about some things. Here's what I wanted to do before you go, Heather, because I think I saw your chat, Angie, and I just wanted to respond. I think part of what we're trying to do is exactly that. So we're not actually rolling out anything right now. This is like the ground zero, the stage zero. Nothing has happened yet because we wanted to do that. So I just wanted to point that out. And I think to your point, Leslie, I mean, I think Heather's probably prepped to talk about food, to talk about babysitting, right? And I think we actually do need to drop in the contracting manual so that people have a reference point. We can go there, but I do want to acknowledge and just be honest, and I know that there were other hands in the queue that I think were about non-related to ground truthing. And so I guess I guess in some ways I'm asking like a little bit of a permission, like if we want to talk about some of those barriers, Heather's prepped to do it. I also just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of those who kind of put their hands down because they had other comments they wanted to share. And I don't remember what time we end, but I just didn't want to walk away from this without acknowledging that other people had their hands up and probably had things to say too. So that's more for the group. And I guess I know that, Lashe is facilitating this and she's doing amazing, but I think we can go deeper into the barriers that we're facing, or we can kind of shift to people that have had their hands raised. And I know we have, I think, other things that we wanted to share out again, because this is very much the ground zero.
Yeah, just real quickly, I totally agree with you, Chanel. I appreciate the passion. What I was gonna suggest is if you all are interested in a conversation about these limitations, if you could put in the chat that you would like to be included in a call to talk about this, we would love to set up a call and talk specifically about this. But Chanel is very, very right. Our objective is to make sure that we are making ourselves better partners to all community experts, really, which is those that are living and growing and learning and experience all that every day to day, which you're absolutely right, Leslie. All the things that you brought up are all things that we've been like struggling with, trying to figure out how we can be better and do better, which is really this whole process, right? Like that's part of it too, is part of the conversations that we want to get into, roll up our sleeves and have the conversations with the community experts that are able to and willing to provide their time. And as Chanel mentioned earlier, part of this is us acknowledging that we need to be able to compensate. So through this whole ground truthing process, we're also hoping to be able to have much more in-depth conversations about all these things, including this, for our bigger, broader efforts, the regs, the plans that we do, all the things. But happy, 100% happy to also make sure we have some calls sooner rather than later to talk with you all about any questions you want on the contracts and grants and all of our fun drama. But thank you for the passion and the comments.
Thank you, Chanel and Heather. So I think the next step is to just talk about next steps really quickly before we start losing folks. And then I have the list of folks who had their hand raised, and I will start calling on them as soon as we're done going over that timeline. And then I will say, I know that we have our interpreters here until 8:30. And so I know on our side, we can stay past the 8 o'clock until the interpretation ends, but I want to be respectful of folks' time. So timeline. Then I'll call on the folks that had their hands raised earlier, and we'll go from there. Sound good? I believe slides back again.
Thank you, Elisha. Thank you, Bobby. Can you just really quickly go to the previous slide? Great. So yes, so this is exactly some of the next steps that we plan to be taking as part of the next steps for the grant filling process. As mentioned, we released a solicitation, and thank you so much for the wonderful feedback, and definitely yes to that conversation to figure out how can we improve that solicitation process. So throughout the process, part of the application packet, resume, thinking about things, how we can improve on there. After we have all the pool of applicants, then we'll be going through these, selecting the committee experts, and then following with committee expert meetings and the committee meetings. So, and I will touch about this in the next slide. So this is the high-level overview of the current proposed timeline for developing the PIC model. And so we say proposed timeline because we know that some of the timelines may be changing as we work with all of you. And from what we have heard so far, some of the feedback and recommendations, suggestions that you're providing to us, so possibly this timeline will be changing. So we just wanted to point out that as part of the community experts, there's 4 meetings that we're planning to hold for the duration of this process. Again, we have a tentative timeline of when this will be happening. We're kicking off the first meeting around July. So there's enough time between now to July because there's a lot of contracting paperwork and things that we need to figure out and going through the selection process. So that's why there's that gap there. And so beginning July through the rest of the year, that's when the community expert meetings will be happening along with the community meetings in different locations. And I also want to emphasize that we haven't set any specific locations yet. And I'm really happy to hear, all this feedback about prioritizing maybe some regions and thinking about how, as Leslie mentioned, how do we even get people to those meetings? So definitely looking forward to hear from all of you more recommendations of how can we improve and better organize our timeline to move this process forward. So I think I'll stop there and I'll hand it back to Lashe to see if there are any questions about this or any other topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose, and thanks for sharing more about the timeline. Okay, so I'm going to go in the order that we had previously. And so the first person is Richard Long, and then after that, I'll call on Mauro Libre. So Richard Long.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Leslie Martinez, you give me hope. Thank you. And for all of you at the CARB present, I see a lot of young faces. So that also gives me hope, because no one wants to talk about bad things. And unfortunately, we are bombarded every single day with a lot of things that are not facts or truths or whatever. I've been involved for the last 40 years in the transportation industry, and I started working with CARB around 2005 when there was the first batch of DPF replacement trucks and so forth. But we need to think also about why we want to engage the community. If we want to clean if we're thinking of cleaning the environment, we need to make sure that people understand We with our organization, Hispanic Model Press Foundation, we've been doing some outreach, and we've been just totally surprised by the lack of understanding of, for example, why do we need an electric car? And when manufacturers through marketing push you that, you know, it's great that a car goes 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, they don't tell you that you wasted all your energy in your battery that it could have taken you for 100 miles. So we need to really provide information, the right information to the communities, and why we need to do this transition to, you know, why do we need the cleaner air? It's really what is happening. People said carbon dioxide like it was a bad word. Well, we need carbon dioxide. If we don't have carbon dioxide, the planet doesn't work. That's a fact. I mean, we need levels of between 280 to 350 parts per million for the planet to live. So carbon dioxide is not bad. The excess of carbon dioxide is bad. It's really bad. But, you know, so I think this is the things that we also need to take into account, not just engage in the communities, but why we engage in the communities. You know, we need to create a plan of how we, if we want people to understand the dark future that we have, and unfortunately it's bad, and there's no way around it. The climate is going to keep changing. The planet is alive, and whether how much the 8 billion people in the planet contribute to this or not, it's still debatable, but there's a lot of things that are misinformed. At the World Economic Forum, and you can check it out, the Swiss Prime Minister announced that she wants to ban all cars, period. So wait a minute, you know, how are you going to do that? How the world is going to move? So again, we need to inform our communities about why we're doing the things that we need to do, so they can understand and better accept the reality of why we need, you know, cleaner air. I had in 2010, I had approximately, I would say, at least 50 companies that had to shut down doors. I have a couple of company owners crying on my desk because they could not comply with the CARB rules, and they were out of business. Businesses that were 30 generational business in the trucking industry. But perhaps if someone explained that, well, there is a cost, right? And this is what we're doing it to clean the environment, maybe there's a better understanding. But where I live, I would like to have an electric car, but I live in a non-incorporated area, so we have no services. The closest charger to me is in Adelanto. There's one single charger that is broken. When I go to the market is 7 miles away. Phelan, there are no chargers. So it's great to have an electric car, but I couldn't have one. You know, so again, we need to talk about infrastructure. We need to, when we talk about infrastructure, we need to create, what is infrastructure? Why do we make a park where we have electric chargers instead of being something that when going to this repair, then they become a nuisance for the community. So there's a lot of things that we need to do, and we need to start doing fast because the climate, it's going to keep changing. But at least I'm glad to see a lot of young people, you know, I've been very impressed. And I'm here to see if, again, just to put my 2 cents worth and create programs that are really effective to make everyone understand what is that we need to do if we want to have a future. Because if we continue in this path without doing anything, our future is going to be a lot shorter. So that's all I needed to say for now. Thank you very much, and I hope to work with you.
Thank you, Ricardo, for telling us more about the emphasis to focus on climate change. Really appreciate that, and also getting us back to our first principles of like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Next in line, we have Maro Libre.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Lachey. So I'll start with a short story. The last time I went to a AB 617 meeting, I noticed that from the public sector, there were only 2 representatives of community-based organizations. And I asked the Air District about the lack of public participation because there was a lot in the beginning. And both of those community-based organizations took turns responding on behalf of the Air District. One of them said, the community is tired. I would bet dollars to donuts that less than 1 person out of every 10,000 knows about AB 617 in South Sacramento. So they're not tired, they're uninformed. And the fact that your guys' community-based organization partner would say that, I think speaks to a lack of engagement with the actual community. What I've heard here today, both from CARB staff and community-based organizations, is the same rhetoric I heard 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Working with the same folks, you should not be in the same place that you're at 6 years ago. If I look at this process through the lens of a Black awakening in capitalist America, the only people benefiting are the middle class people of color who were already positioned to do well, because the most vulnerable communities still get left behind. Now in South Sacramento, we have community-based organizations touting a 12-year-old doing air monitoring in South Sac. He's doing that air monitoring across the street from the AB 617 boundaries. And that's great for STEM purposes. Hooray for encouraging science in the barrio. But he shouldn't be replacing governmental staff who are trained in federal methods that are actionable and are monitoring there. When I look at the news, I see my air district touting this phenomenal technology in the richest parts of Sacramento. But in South Sac, across the street from the AB 617 boundaries, it's a 12-year-old learning STEM responsible for letting us know what's in our community air. At least that's the messaging I'm getting. So I think the system is flawed in that even what I hear from your community-based organization partners is not very deep. I don't believe they are engaging the most vulnerable people. See, if you were to hear something innovative, I'll give it to you guys right now. I'll give you a gem. A lot of people who inherit marginalization and are Chicanos work against their own interests by running to conservatism. When you show up talking about electric cars, doing away with gas stoves, they see you as an agent of the liberal left and not as someone trying to help improve their health. They will react to you very negatively, and there is a large community of people like that. But all I hear from you guys and your community-based organizations is the same messaging, which has been going on for 4 years. I think you should strive to have people that speak up out of spirit and not because they're paid. And I think you should create metrics for community-based organizations as well. There should not be 2 people that are being paid by a community-based organization as the only ones at an AB 617 meeting. And it shouldn't be the same 10 immigrants paraded at every meeting. Grow it to 20 to 30, throw in other groups. There is not a lot of Vietnamese people in your processes. If you're in South Sac, you see huge enclaves of Middle Eastern people living in the hood. They are not present in your processes. And throwing money at executive directors of CBOs has not changed the situation in my community. And I've yet to hear them embrace an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. It's ignored. No one speaks up for us. So thank you for this opportunity to share what's going on in my community and give you some insight into a large segment of Raza who are already hostile towards you because you don't know how to talk to them and your CBOs don't know how to talk to them. And that's real talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauro. I really appreciate you sort of highlighting this disconnect between community and community-based organizations. And just wanting to highlight maybe Jonathan or Joyce, if you guys want to speak to ways that we are trying to build out with ground truthing, not just the community expert, but other ways that we're trying to get at community voices so that we can speak to things like Mauro is talking about with this disconnect. So just saying more about the written portion and things like that in the roadshow.
Yeah, so yeah, really appreciate everything. that you bring up. Those are things that we definitely need to think about more. Again, as Jose just showed in the timeline and through the last few slides, we absolutely want to include a lot of the community voices that aren't just part of the CBOs, and what we are going to consider the community experts. And so we really appreciate getting more feedback and maybe other ways we could also involve the residents beyond that, because those are not part of who are going to be contracted with. So we can definitely expand our efforts when it comes to working with communities beyond this community expert work group as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And also, before I call on the next speaker, just want to say thank you to everyone for their patience. I know there are folks who've had their hands raised for a long time. I'm not ignoring you. I see you. Apologies, and thank you for your patience. Laura Hayter was next in line. Laura, are you still with us? Wanted to give you an opportunity to speak. Okay, if you come back, just put your name in the chat, then I'll call on you again. Leslie, I don't know if there was something else you wanted to add on to to all the knowledge.
I'm okay, but thank you so much for everybody for all of this, and thanks for starting this conversation and figuring out next steps. Really excited to hear where we go from here.
Okay, thank you. And then Kim McCoy, I didn't know if there was more that you had to add, but I remember that your hand was also raised previously.
No, I said what I needed to say, but I do see that LaDonna Williams has had her hand up
She's
for a
the
while.
very next person, not saying I'm just trying to honor people whose hands are raised. I hear, yep, she's my next person, I promise.
Okay.
Hi, LaDonna, it's good to see you again too. You are our next in line. It's been a while. Hello.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Yeah, it kind of got me off track for a minute. I thought we were going down one path and seemed like we got derailed, but first of all, I just want to say it's been a long evening. And so trying to pull my thoughts together, I had them concise and now they're all over the place. So y'all gonna get the all over the place since I patiently waited. You mentioned, how can you address these issues? And from what I understood, this project is about paying community experts, which I want to commend you for hearing the community in that our time and our expertise needs to be paid. So that definitely should not be underscored. I think I want to say kudos to you for recognizing that. And it's a very important part of building trust, building respect, and paying folks in an equitable way to address some very serious issues that have allowed to get to this off the hook level because of the neglect of our communities, particularly our historically disadvantaged, highest risk, longest term exposed community populations, particularly those that are Black. This has been a population that has been historically and continues to be ignored compared to other populations. We hear the term Black and brown, we throw in tribal, we throw in all of these other marginalized groups, which no doubt in some way they are marginalized, but not at the same level that Black communities are and have been marginalized when it comes to attention on prioritizing their health impacts and issues, as Lonnie Mason, first generation, spoke on earlier, Dominique Brooks spoke on in Rodale, and in our community in South Vallejo. The same thing, and we cannot ignore and tippy-toe around the fact that these are Black communities that, yeah, we're engaging, but when you actually look at the action taken, for instance, I know firsthand that over there in Hunters Point, you may have individually went over there to Hunters Point because you've got coveted relationships with certain community members that agency has deemed the voice of the community. Or as we routinely hear about Miss Margaret's group over there in West Oakland. Y'all love to go to Miss Margaret and Lewis. And those two folks have historically been CARB's go-to when our communities are so much bigger than those two folks that you guys have poster child in front of us. Now, I'll commend you that you've made more of an effort to get some funding out to other groups. But really, when you look at your communities that have received the support needed and the attention needed, it still continues to be Black lagging further and further behind. First Generations asked for a community tour with you guys engaged with them and other agencies back in, it was actually before the COVID hit, then was patient through the COVID process, yet and still, and I appreciate it, Chanel, that you acknowledged that, but that's still not enough because you guys went and toured, what was it, 3, 4, maybe 5 other groups, jumped past Lonnie's area, or at least that organization's request, and you saw fit some kind of way, some kind of how, y'all recognize these other communities were of value and made the effort to go there. Yet here's Lonnie still waving his hands and, hey, we're gonna get to you. This is something you agencies have done for the last 20 plus years, because we could go back to 2003 with the EJ or CJAC or whatever it was called, California Environmental Justice Advisory Group. And guess what? They did the same thing then to our Bay Area communities that they're doing now. And that is prioritizing other non-Black communities ahead of ours. So if you really want to know how to address this issue, absolutely. Number one is money. We can't even be online here without being adequately paid. I can't pay my internet unless I get some funding. Yes, I am a long-term time community expert, and so are many others on here. If you don't want to be paid and you feel like it's not a value, we understand that. We all got choices. But those of us that have been committed to this process and have been working with CARB and other entities, but specifically with CARB on this issue of air pollution, we absolutely should be right now knowing how much you guys are planning to pay communities, because we didn't even get to that point. What is that process? We saw the graphs that you set up, so we can kind of figure that out. But we should have been focused on how much folks is going to be getting paid through this process, and is it equitable enough? And community should have a voice and a lead in saying what our value is worth, because many have heard, wrote notes, taken copious notes actually on things that we have brought to the table. Our intellectual properties have been taken, our ideas have been taken, and others have been able to live and operate off of communities suffering, particularly Black community suffering. Because when you hear Dominique speak of her community, she's not only talking about exposure to a refinery. She lives by a refinery. 25 steps away is a raw sewage plant. Another 25 steps away is a energy storage company that blew up on the side of the mountain a couple of years ago that still haven't been addressed. And between both CARB and the Air District, they're allowing Phillips 66 to build this so-called biofuels project that has been able to run amok. They haven't been permitted, and they're already up and operating. And the solution will be, well, we're just going to give them some fines, and a slap on the hand fines at that, while this community is struggling to breathe and stay alive. Yet when they ask you to come and tour, if you get a tour, you get one, and then they go on about their merry business, go to Starbucks, get their drink, and forget about you. And then you come into these processes, and we're supposed to be nice and cordial and, go according to plan and be polite. In the meantime, you get a diagnosis that your dad got cancer, your mom got cancer, you and your neighbor are supposed to go and do a survey to test your water, only to find your neighbor dead in the house, who is supposed to be one of your community members to help go and do the water testing. These are the real life things of what we're dealing with. So you best believe in this process, I'm expecting to hear how much you're gonna pay community folks who are community experts that wanna go through this process, which I think is a great one. But the way that you get there and how long it's gonna take, that's where I have the problem with, because if I gauge how long it's taken you guys to support first generations over there in Hunters Point, who is not a coveted, favored community-based group that either agency have worked with, then we're doomed. We'll never get there. It'll be forever. It'll be as long as I waited to get in this comment that I'm purposely dragging out to see some results, because that's how it's been in our community. Now, does that mean CARB has not supported some of our efforts? That's not what I'm saying. They have begun to pay attention, but we're still 10, 20, 30 years behind everyone else. Yet when we come to these processes, we hear Black and brown, we hear tribal, peel them layers back. Tribal gets support from every agency and the government. Yet they pimp off Black folks when it comes to, tribal and Black communities. Tribal is getting funded. Black communities got to beg, borrow, and steal to get it. And then when we do get it, it's still not enough because we've been ignored and marginalized for so long. So my solution and recommendation is you prioritize the Black communities that have not been a priority within these agency processes. You prioritize them with the funding, you prioritize them with whatever support and recommendations that the communities feel that they need. So thank you for my time.
Thank you, LaDonna. Before I kick it over to Chanel to speak to some of the points you made, I just want to apologize. I didn't want it to make it seem as though I was ignoring your hand or not calling on your hand. So my sincerest apologies there. But I will say very much worth the wait. I appreciate you saying who we should prioritize, right? As a Black person myself, I can't say that I disagree with you. So with that, I will pass it over to Chanel to speak to some of LaDonna's finer points.
Yeah, I feel like that's like a Vanessa Williams song or something, like saving the best for last. So that's what I was thinking when you were speaking. So I hope, I don't know everyone here, so I'm not going to say that I do, but people that do know me, I don't lie. I try to be as straightforward as I can. So that's what I'm going to do here. LaDonna, there is nothing that you said that wasn't incorrect. I think that's absolutely true. I haven't been at the agency for as long as others have been, but we definitely, I think you used the word coveted. I would have said prioritize. Either way, we're saying the same thing. There are definitely, I think, groups and communities that we have prioritized. We have not set up standardized or fair processes or systems. That is all true. And I think to your point about Lonnie, and Lonnie, you made this point earlier too, the time that it took us to get the tour versus the time that it took us to do other things for some of our other groups, unacceptable. And I'm taking full responsibility for that because I'm the deputy over environmental justice. So that comes back to me and it reflects on me. And so I think the first part of acknowledging anything, right, is being honest and being transparent and being upfront with what we have done and what we want to do moving forward. So I appreciate your kind of acknowledgement of like, hey, I see you guys doing some things in the right directions, but I also see the places where we're not seeing change. Some of the things that I did want to say is that really quickly, part of what I think from my last year of doing tours, what I realized, as I pointed out, we've never had a standardized process. It's always kind of been who reaches out to us, who we talk to, who we have relationships with, and depending on resources, who we can kind of go out and build those relationships with. And so I do want to commit here tonight to everybody that part of what you will be seeing from us is an actual process, right? That's in place, that doesn't prioritize certain groups over other groups, that is fair, because I think that that's exactly right. And that to me makes a ton of sense. And I think that's not just for the tours, because you weren't just speaking about the tours, you were speaking in general. And that's something that I think we do need to work on. And so I think I love your comments. I love your transparency and your directness. And so I know that we've had conversations. I know we both get busy, but I want to keep those conversations going, not just with you, but with Lonnie and others, because part of what we need to do a better job of is making sure that we're not, I think, we're not prioritizing anyone over anyone else, and that we really are, I think, embodying those principles of environmental justice. The last thing I will say really quickly, because I know we're running out of time, and I think the group does want to talk about how much we're funding people, is that I realize this process is not perfect. I don't think we're saying it is. I know that we need a lot of work, and I kind of saw in the chat, right, this feels like the same thing we've heard before. We're trying to do something different, and I think we want to work with people here. And this is not just, you know, Chanel, this is not just Heather. We're all from actually different divisions within CARB, and we're all committed to this process and to figuring out what do we need to do to shift this so it doesn't just feel like the same rhetoric. We can have that follow-up conversation where we talk about the barriers that we are facing in some of this, just to be transparent, because again, we want to think creatively about this, but I appreciate those that understand and see that intent, and I know that some of the other ones who don't, I understand that that's obviously based on the experiences that you've had previously, and so I really do look forward to this process and to us being able to show, not just in our words, but in our actions, that we really are committed to changing and being different than we have in the past. And with that said, I think, Ladonna, you're off mute, and I'm supposed to give it back to, I think, Lashe. So I'll just mute myself and see where it goes.
Well, I just wanted to add this as well. I think it's important, and I understand community can't necessarily run agencies, inter agency politics, relationships, or what have you. But I also think it's really important too to put aside personalities and be able to recognize the real folks, or I shouldn't say real folks, but the folks who have real community connections, being able to work with community, having that knack. You know, it's almost like singing. Some people was born with it, that natural ability to be able to connect, and others have to learn it. You know, I think the same thing is with community relationships and being able to build that spirit of working together to get things done. And what I've seen, and this is my personal experience with staff, where we were making strides in some real positive movements. And I'm talking about for our Black communities that have been pretty much ignored and invisible. And we begin to make some positive moves, and then CARB removes the staff out of the position and things tanked out. And it's almost like we took 20 steps back. And now we're starting over this process again. And I think CARB would do us well by recognizing and looking at staff that has been able to make those connections. And it's no secret, and I'll say it, Jose Saldana, that came in to not only our community, but Rodale over there in Hunters Point. I know in Potrero Hill, in Midway, there were other areas where this gentleman was able to come in, and even though he ain't Black, we were still able to make that connection because he understood that when Black folks spoke about their suffering, that didn't mean it was at the exclusion of others. And I hate to even have to say that. I should be able to focus on my people and my community's needs, since we are suffering the most, and not have to apologize or explain that I'm not excluding anyone else. Because guess what? Ain't nobody cared up until this point that Black folks have been excluded until Black folks started taking the stance and forcing the issue. But you need people that can work across the board, regardless of color, and be able to work together and recognize who those priority communities are, and be willing to call out agency when you're not following a path that is really bringing us to this environmental equitable position for all, because that's how people like to approach this, like we're all in this together. Yeah, well, we may all be affected by climate change and other elements, yet the way agency responds to us is not the same. And it's no secret, we all know who continues to get the least support. And so we cannot accept anymore either poster child folks that the agencies have deemed worthy of getting majority of the funding and then sign off on the box and say, hey, we've met that quota. Nah, this is a different time and day. So as we move forward, we're going to hold y'all to the fire and the wire on what you're saying you're trying to do. But I also would appreciate when we talk about this process here of community experts and paying what is fair, that we're going to focus on paying community experts and not get sidetracked with all this other stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, LaDonna. I appreciate you holding our foot to the fire. And I'm going to pass it over to Jose to speak directly to how much we're compensating folks to get to the latter point that you made before we close out.
And thank you, Lasha. So just want to emphasize, we currently have funding available to contract with 15 community experts, and they will be compensated $5,000 for each individuals. And again, that's just kind of based on the limited budget that we have available for these purposes. And part of the compensation and part of the ask that we're requiring for the community experts is to attend these these meetings that we're going to be setting up, in addition to setting aside some time to review some materials and documents that we will be co-developing as well. So just in general, right now, what we have estimated is about 5 hours a month that the community experts will be provide their expertise during the duration of the process. So that's just an estimated. And again, it's a $5,000 compensation for their time and expertise. Lasha, back to you.
Thank you. Any last questions or comments before I hand it over to Diane to close us out? Okay, I see Lonnie.
Kind of like didn't understand what Jose was saying there. He said 5,000 a month, and he said it would be what 5 hours, not 5,000 a month. I'm sorry. He said 5,000, but it would be 5 hours a month.
Correct. So we are the entire process. If you recall the timeline, so we're planning that this grant writing process will take approximately 8 months.
That's what I wanted to know. I wanted to know the duration. So it's 5,000 for 8 months at 4 hours per month.
4 to 5 hours per month. That's what we are estimating right now.
Yeah, for 8 months.
Correct.
Okay.
Is that just time for meetings, or does that also include like the amount of work folks are going to put into it?
It will include time for the meetings and then additional time for preparing and reviewing materials. And that's, once we have everything set up, we will have, for the first meeting, we'll be covering all those details. But the $5,000 is just a flat fee to be compensated for all that time.
And also, can you do this? One of the things that is hard for us, in our communities, we already work hard enough. But when you say we have limited funding, we get tired of hearing that. We get tired of hearing that because that's something that's said, you guys say it year after year after year after year. But yet you continue to get paid and go on vacation and can do what you can do what you want to do. As well as, a lot of these NGOs who get the majority of the money. So when you're talking about grassroots organizations who are experts, who are in their community, not the NGOs, not agencies, who are getting paid very well, very well. But then you want to, and I have something to say about the 5,000 for 8 months, 5 hours to month. So it's more than 5 hours. It's going to be more than 5 hours that individual is going to be working on. 5,000, come on now, that's not enough. That's not enough, and I'm going to be honest. I'm sorry. That's not working with the community. That's almost like pimping the community. And we already know what the senators said when they were audited. I'm going to say it, to be called poverty pimps. We can't take advantage of the community. of their time and their expertise and providing their, information to help CARB. Most importantly, to help CARB. Stop saying, oh, this is only that we know that you have the funding. Stop saying we only have a limited amount. So if you don't have enough funding to get these individuals, these experts to do their job, because we know you pay these experts to come in $25,000, $30,000. Other individuals to respond or to speak in these engagements. But yet you're gonna provide community experts who work hard in their community constantly, give them $5,000 for only 8 months. That's unacceptable. Because it's not gonna be 5 hours. And I'm just gonna be clear and call it what it is. Because we've been taken advantage of too many times. Everybody wants to get all our information, steal our intellectual properties, but don't want to provide funding for our communities. Like you do other large NGOs or quote unquote, as you say, experts to come in to talk about our community that they haven't even visited. We know about the topics and the pollution in our community better than the experts that come in. We're well aware because we're dying. We're the ones dying in our communities. You guys don't live in our communities. So who better yet can explain this and help CARB out? But if you want us to help you out, be right. That's why I said do the right thing. That's not doing the right thing. I'm sorry, it's not. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lonnie. This is Heather. I'll help answer some of the questions that there was a bunch of questions in the chat, and you bring up some really good points. And we certainly do not mean to be disrespectful. We are trying to figure out how to work within our limitations, but hear you loud and clear. Agreed. The experts, the community experts such as yourself and others do absolutely need to be paid for your time, your effort. We may have been inaccurately assuming the amount of work associated with this. We assumed 4 to 5 hours a month for 8 months, so about 40 hours of work for the 5,000. So definitely something that we appreciate the feedback on as well. That it sounds like we're grossly underestimating that, and very much want to hear more as folks are reading through the solicitation. We tried to lay out the different tasks that we were asking folks to commit to. And we, like I said, we anticipated that to be about 40 hours, but if sounds like we're wrong on that, but that's where we came up with the 5,000. Hopefully that's helpful. But thank you for sharing that information. We do agree.
Thank you, Lonnie, and thank you, Heather. Really appreciate this feedback. That's why we had, this forum, and we wanted to hear this feedback from you all. So I think we definitely have a lot to consider. This whole team here, keep in mind, we're definitely considering everything you're saying. We're going to go back and we're going to work hard to compile all this feedback and see what we can do to make this the best process possible and make it so that we're not continuing to overburden community. So thank you so much. We really appreciate everything that you're telling us, and rest assured, everyone you see here on the screen, we're going to go back and work really hard on this. So that said, we are at 8:39. I want to be respectful of people's time. I know you've already given us so much time just being here this evening rather than maybe spending time with your families, having dinner, etc. So really appreciate this time that you committed to coming here and telling us how we can do better as an agency, how we can do better at community engagement. 100% appreciate that. Bobby, if you could just put up slide 34. This slide just has our email address where you can continue to email with us, contact us with any questions, and also our website where you can go to learn about this effort, and you can also apply if you'd like to be a community expert. So we will be in touch. We appreciate everything, and we're here genuinely trying to do better, and we hope that we can get there. Appreciate you all. Much love to you all, and please have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you for your time. It was really appreciated.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Stay safe.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
CARB staff, thank you for your time and for your authentic listening. I really appreciate it. I want you to know
Thank you.
it was noticed.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Francine.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, I think we can stop the recording, yeah.